The cold wind whipped through the dust-filled air, and the scent of leather and livestock hung thick in the atmosphere. It was an old, weathered barn at the heart of an isolated livestock auction, and every corner seemed to carry the weight of forgotten hopes. A crowd had gathered, murmurs filling the air like an unwelcome fog. This was where dreams were made or dashed, or where a life's worth of effort could be measured in dollars and cents. Among the sea of familiar faces, a young teenager stood out like a thorn in a field of roses. Tyler Maddox, barely 17, stood near the back, his boots half dusted with the red dirt of his grandfather's ranch. His dark hair was a mess, the wind tugging at the edges of his flannel shirt. He wasn't like the others. While he stood tall and tough, he was small, his eyes constantly darting as if expecting someone to call him out. No one ever saw the real Tyler, the one who didn't fit the mold of a rough cowboy. He was too soft for that, too kind, too different. The auctioneer, a grizzled man with too much sun in his face, stood at the front, ready to bring down the hammer. "All right, folks," he yelled, looking over the crowd with a practiced smirk. "Next up is a real gem, a Mustang, a bag of bones, but there's potential if you got the guts." Tyler's eyes locked on the horse as it was brought into the center of the ring. It was a pitiful sight, a dark bay Mustang, its ribs visible through the thin layer of its coat. His legs were too thin, his eyes wide with terror. The horse trembled, trying to stand tall, but barely able to do so. People in the crowd whispered, snickering at the sight. "He's not worth the feed," someone jeered from behind Tyler. Laughter echoed through the barn. The auctioneer glanced around, making eye contact with a few nearby bidders, all of them shaking their heads. "Well, folks, you heard it. Looks like no one's interested in this poor beast. Who's going to waste their time?" Tyler felt a sharp pang in his chest. There was something about this horse that spoke to him. The fear in its eyes mirrored something deep inside him. People didn't want to understand him either. And now, here was a creature no one cared about, just like him, ignored, overlooked, and struggling to survive. Tyler's hands tightened around the rim of his hat. His grandpa's words echoed in his mind. "Don't waste your time on hopeless cases, boy. The world's too hard to care for every lost cause." But Tyler had already made up his mind. Without thinking, he raised his hand. The auctioneer paused, his smirk turning into a puzzled frown. "Well, I'll be damned," the auctioneer muttered. "Got a live one." "Huh." The crowd went silent, and Tyler could feel every pair of eyes boring into him. The auctioneer shrugged and grinned. "All right, kid. How much you willing to spend on that pile of bones?" $500, Tyler said, his voice low but steady. A ripple of laughter broke out from the crowd. "You've got to be kidding me," someone yelled. Tyler's face flushed, but he didn't back down. He knew this wasn't about winning anyone's approval. It was about what he believed in, what he saw that others didn't. The auctioneer nodded, slowly, his tone dripping with sarcasm. $500 it is. Going once, going twice. Tyler's heart hammered in his chest, but he held his ground. "Sold," the auctioneer finally called out, slamming his gavel down with a force that felt like it echoed through the whole barn. As Tyler stepped forward to claim the horse, the laughter continued. But it wasn't for long. The crowd fell into a hushed murmur, watching as he led the trembling Mustang out of the ring. Tyler didn't care about the whispers. He only had one goal now: to make sure that this horse, the one everyone else had abandoned, would never feel alone again. Tyler Maddox's boots scraped along the dirt path that led up to his grandfather's ranch, a modest plot of land that seemed to breathe the same quiet desperation as its owner. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the old wooden house that had seen better days. It had been his home for as long as he could remember, a place of stubborn tradition, hard work, and no room for softness. But for Tyler, it never quite felt like home. Not really. At 17, Tyler had long since learned that the world didn't have a place for boys like him. His peers, the other kids in town, made sure of that. They called him weak, too soft to be a real cowboy. The words stung, each one a reminder that he didn't fit into the mold they had carved out for themselves. They were loud, rowdy, and tough. They thrived in the brutal, unforgiving world of ranching, a place where survival meant pushing your emotions down and never letting them show. But Tyler wasn't like that. He wasn't tough. He was sensitive, thoughtful, qualities that didn't make him fit in here, in a town where survival depended on being more than just strong. It demanded being hard as stone. His grandfather, Gus Maddox, was the person who raised him after Tyler's parents had passed when he was just a little boy. Gus had never been the type to coddle. He had a reputation for being as tough as the land he worked on, as unforgiving as the very cattle he raised. To him, there was no room for weakness. His teachings had always been simple, stark, and clear. Work hard, keep your head down, and let your actions speak louder than your words. He called it the cowboy way. Though Tyler often wondered if it was just a way of making people forget that they had feelings too. As Tyler made his way toward the barn, with Blaze trailing behind him, he couldn't help but notice the familiar weight of his grandfather's disapproval in the air. Gus stood on the porch, his hands resting on the railing, his eyes narrowed in that way they always were when he was deep in thought. Tyler wasn't sure if it was disappointment or something else, but either way, it was enough to make him feel small. Blaze, the Mustang, was a pitiful sight as he stumbled after Tyler, his legs too weak to hold him up for long. The horse had no trust in people, not yet. But Tyler, as strange as it was, felt something deep inside of him when he looked at Blaze. It was like they were two misfits, two souls thrown together by fate. Neither of them quite fitting into the world around them. You really bought that thing, didn't you? Gus's voice came from behind, dry and gruff. He didn't need to ask the question. It was more of a statement. Gus had seen it all before. Horses, cattle, men who were never cut out for this life, yet somehow clung to it anyway. Tyler turned slowly, not quite meeting his grandfather's eyes. Yeah, I did. He's not much, but I think we can make it work. Gus scoffed and shook his head. Make it work? He stepped off the porch, the creaking of the wood the only sound in the stillness. That horse can't even stand on his own. What makes you think you can fix him? You're not some miracle worker, Tyler. I don't need him to be perfect, Grandpa, Tyler said softly, his eyes on Blaze as he fidgeted nervously beside him. I just need him to be okay. That's enough for me. Gus looked at him, his expression unreadable. For a long moment there was silence. The wind rustled the leaves in the trees, and the distant sound of cattle lowing seemed to make the air feel even thicker. Gus finally spoke, his voice quieter this time. You're too soft, son. This life, it's a hard one. Ain't no place for softness here. Not for you, not for him. Tyler's heart clenched. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell his grandfather that he didn't care about being tough. He didn't care about fitting in, but the words caught in his throat. The pressure of the years, of trying so hard to meet expectations, weighed heavily on him. It was as though every word Gus said was a reminder that he wasn't enough. Not yet, but the bond between him and Blaze, it was already forming. Tyler could feel it. The horse's frightened eyes weren't so different from his own. Both of them had been overlooked. Both of them had been cast aside. And now, here they were, thrown together in a world that didn't care if they ever made it. But Tyler didn't care either. He was tired of trying to meet the world's expectations. All he wanted was to make something of this, even if it meant failing. That night, Tyler sat in the barn, the dull light from the lantern flickering softly as he watched Blaze. The Mustang was still trembling, standing in the corner of the stall, his body rigid with fear. Tyler didn't move to force him. He didn't rush. Instead, he sat quietly, in the corner, just watching him. He didn't say a word. He knew that trust didn't come with demands, it came with patience. Tyler had learned that much from his own life. Maybe the world didn't think he was strong enough, but that didn't mean he wasn't capable. It didn't mean he didn't have the heart to see things through. And tonight, as the Mustang's ears flicked toward him as he took a slow step forward, Tyler knew this would be the beginning of something far more important than proving himself to anyone else. It was just him, Blaze, and the quiet determination to make things work. The barn was quieter now, the steady rhythm of the horses' breathing filling the stillness of the evening air. Tyler sat cross-legged in the corner, his back against the wooden wall, watching Blaze. The Mustang stood in the opposite corner of the stall, his body taut, eyes wide with fear. His coat was thin and dull, his ribs visible through the patchy fur. He looked like he hadn't seen a proper meal in weeks, and his every movement was cautious, as though he expected the world to lash out at him again. Tyler didn't mind the silence. In fact, he found it comforting. There was no pressure to say the right thing, no demands for action. It was just the two of them, sharing the space. And he let the silence stretch, giving Blaze time to adjust to the new surroundings. Time to settle into the fact that this was his new home, whether he liked it or not. It had been a few days since the auction, and Tyler had spent every moment he could at the barn. It wasn't just about the horse. It was about giving both of them a chance to find a way out of the darkness, a chance to build something, even if it was just a bond. But it wasn't easy. Blaze had no intention of trusting anyone. Every time Tyler made a move toward him, the Mustang would flinch, his eyes darting away, his body trembling. Tyler could almost feel the fear radiating off him, the way his muscles tightened in response to any movement. It wasn't just a horse that had been broken. It was a spirit. "Easy there, boy," Tyler murmured softly, not moving a muscle. He knew better than to rush him. It wasn't like some of the other horses Tyler had worked with on the ranch. Horses that had been trained. Horses that had known the touch of a kind hand before. No, Blaze was different. He had been tossed aside, forgotten, and left to fend for himself in a world that had been cruel and unkind. Tyler leaned his head back against the wall, sighing. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind, words that Tyler had heard for as long as he could remember. "That thing ain't worth the hay it eats," Gus had said when he'd first seen Blaze. "He's broken, Tyler. You're just wasting your time." But Tyler didn't believe that. He couldn't. He'd seen that same look in the eyes of too many people in his own life. People who'd been discarded, who'd been told they didn't matter. He couldn't be that person who gave up on someone. Not now. Not when it mattered most. And after what seemed like hours of just sitting there, Blaze finally took a hesitant step toward him. It was slow, deliberate, as though he was testing the waters, unsure of whether he should trust the boy sitting on the ground. His ears flicked back and forth nervously, but there was something in his eyes, something that said maybe, just maybe, he was willing to try. Tyler held his breath, not wanting to startle him. He kept his hands at his sides, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He knew that if he reached out too quickly, Blaze would pull away, and all the progress they'd made would be undone. Blaze stopped just a few feet away from him, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. Tyler could see the muscles in his neck twitch, his entire body still tense with anxiety. It wasn't much, but it was something. Tyler smiled to himself. The smallest of victories. Over the next few weeks, things began to change, though the transformation was painfully slow. Tyler wasn't in a rush. He knew that patience was the key. Every day, he would come to the barn after school, sitting quietly in the stall with Blaze, talking to him in a low voice, reading aloud from whatever book he had on hand. He would talk about everything and nothing, letting his words fill the silence. He would talk about his grandpa, about the ranch, about the town, things that were familiar and comforting to him, hoping they would be the same for Blaze. And every day, Blaze grew a little bit less afraid. He would let Tyler get closer, sometimes even standing still, as Tyler approached. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when Blaze would pull back or flinch at the slightest touch. But there were also moments when he would nudge Tyler's hand, his muzzle soft against the boy's palm. It was a small gesture, but to Tyler it felt like a promise that maybe, just maybe, the horse would learn to trust him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light through the barn's open door, Tyler stood at Blaze's side, brushing the horse's coat gently. The horse stood still, his head lowered, his eyes half closed in a rare moment of calm. The trust between them wasn't perfect yet, far from it. But it was growing, and Tyler could feel it in every touch, in every quiet moment they shared. "You're not so bad, are you?" Tyler said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. Blaze didn't move, but Tyler could have sworn the Mustang understood. Maybe not with his mind, but with his heart. Tyler stepped back and smiled. "We'll get there. I know we will." But even as he said the words, a familiar unease settled in his chest. He couldn't help but wonder what would happen when people started to see what he was doing, when they saw how much time and energy he was putting into this horse that most of them considered worthless. What would they say? What would his grandpa say? Tyler's eyes flicked toward the doorway, where the fading light from the setting sun spilled across the barn floor. There was no way of knowing yet. All he could do was keep going one day at a time, hoping that Blaze would one day believe in him the way Tyler had begun to believe in Blaze. The days turned to weeks, and with each passing one, the bond between Tyler and Blaze grew stronger. Though it wasn't always easy. The Mustang, with his battered body and fearful heart, was a puzzle that Tyler was determined to solve. Every night after school, he would walk down to the barn, his boots crunching against the gravel, his heart beating with anticipation. He knew Blaze was waiting for him, and that thought kept him going. Tyler had always felt out of place in town, and though he loved his grandfather's ranch, he never truly felt like he fit into the world around him. The other kids in the area laughed at him, calling him soft. He'd never been one to show off or seek attention, preferring the quiet moments alone, reading or working with animals. But he knew that he couldn't change who he was, just like Blaze couldn't change what had happened to him. The Mustang had been broken, but maybe Tyler could help fix him. Each evening, Tyler would enter the barn, the familiar scent of hay and dust filling the air. Blaze would be standing in the same spot, as though frozen in time, his eyes wide and watchful. But there was something different now. The fear that had once controlled every movement of the horse had started to fade, if only a little. The tension in Blaze's muscles was still there, but it wasn't as sharp. Tyler could see it in the horse's eyes. The subtle shift, the glimmer of curiosity. Tyler didn't rush. He knew better than to push. The lessons of the ranch had taught him that much. Whether it was with horses or people, trust took time. And it wasn't always about big gestures. It was about the quiet moments. The moments when you just sat with someone or something and let time do its work. He began reading aloud to Blaze at night, his voice low and steady, like the rhythm of the wind in the trees. He didn't care if Blaze was listening or not. It wasn't about the words. It was about being there, in the same space, letting the sound of his voice fill the silence. He started with the books his grandfather had once read to him, stories of cowboys and ranch life, tales of people who had struggled and persevered. He hoped that, somehow, Blaze would understand the message. As the nights passed, Tyler noticed a change in Blaze. The Mustang began to move closer when Tyler approached. At first, it was just a few inches, a careful, tentative step, but it was progress. Blaze would let Tyler get closer, the gap between them shrinking with each day. Sometimes, when Tyler sat beside him, Blaze would stand still, his body less tense, his eyes focused on Tyler. There was no rushing this, Tyler knew. But the moments when Blaze was still, when the two of them sat in the quiet of the barn, were moments that felt like victory. One evening, as Tyler sat on the wooden floor with a book in his lap, he looked over at Blaze. The Mustang was standing near him, his head lowered, his body no longer rigid. For the first time, Blaze didn't flinch when Tyler shifted or moved toward him. Tyler reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly, as he extended it toward the horse's nose. Blaze didn't pull back. Instead, he sniffed Tyler's hand, his nostrils flaring slightly as he tested the air. Tyler's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He didn't push forward. He didn't try to pet Blaze. Instead, he held his hand there, palm open, waiting for the horse to make the next move. And then, slowly, tentatively, Blaze nudged his nose forward and brushed against Tyler's hand. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Tyler's eyes softened, and he smiled. It wasn't a wide grin, but a quiet, knowing smile. He didn't need Blaze to trust him completely right away. He just needed to know that the connection was real, that it was possible. Over the next few weeks, the progress continued, slow but steady. Tyler would spend hours at a time with Blaze, not rushing the process, just being with him. He would brush the Mustang's coat, careful not to startle him, and read aloud, his voice a constant presence in the barn. Sometimes Tyler would sit in silence, just watching Blaze. There were still moments when the horse would pull back or startle at sudden movements, but the difference was that those moments were becoming less frequent. Grandpa Gus had watched the transformation with a skeptical eye. He still couldn't understand why Tyler was putting so much energy into a horse that most people had given up on. It wasn't just the horse, it was the way Tyler had been changing. Gus had never seen his grandson this dedicated before. There was a fire in him now, something that hadn't been there before. And while Gus didn't say it aloud, he noticed the change. One evening, after another quiet session in the barn, Tyler walked out to the porch where his grandfather was sitting, looking out over the sprawling ranch. The sky was a deep purple, the first stars starting to appear above. Gus didn't turn to look at Tyler as he approached, but he spoke, his voice gruff. "You're making progress with that horse, aren't you?" Tyler nodded, though his grandfather couldn't see it. "Yeah, he's starting to trust me." Gus didn't reply immediately. Instead, he took a long drag from his pipe, the smoke curling into the night air. After a long silence, he finally said, "Well, if you're going to do this, you'd better stick with it. The world ain't kind to people who start something they can't finish." Tyler didn't say anything at first. He wasn't sure how to explain it. The world might not be kind, but that didn't matter. All that mattered was the quiet trust that was building between him and Blaze. Something he hadn't known he needed, but something that felt more real than anything else. "I'll stick with it, Grandpa," Tyler said quietly. "I promise." And in that moment, under the vast sky, Tyler knew he wasn't just saving Blaze. He was saving himself, too. The quiet days at the barn had given way to something more intense. Tyler had spent months bonding with Blaze, building trust between them, and although the progress had been slow, there was now a deep connection between boy and horse. It wasn't just about the hours spent together, brushing the Mustang's coat or reading aloud in the dim light of the barn. It was about what they had built through the unspoken language of patience and care. But not everyone saw it that way. Tyler could feel the shift in the air the moment he entered the diner in town. It was a familiar place, the kind of hole-in-the-wall restaurant where everyone knew your name and everyone had an opinion. Most of the time, Tyler could ignore the stares and whispers that followed him as he walked through the door. But today felt different. There was something more pointed about the way people watched him, more judgment in their eyes. He spotted the usual group of local boys sitting at their regular booth in the back corner, laughing and pointing at something. Tyler couldn't help but feel the familiar sting in his chest. The laughter wasn't aimed at him, but it never failed to find its mark. You think he'll actually get that skeleton of his into the rodeo? A voice cut through the low hum of chatter. Tyler's pulse quickened. He knew who the voice belonged to. It was Derek Hunt, one of the more popular and more ruthless boys in town. Derek had always been the first to mock him, to remind Tyler that he wasn't like the others. Tyler tried to ignore the comment, but when Derek's eyes locked with his across the room, he felt the weight of the challenge. Tyler didn't want to rise to it. He didn't want to prove anything to anyone, least of all to Derek and his friends. But Blaze needed this. Tyler needed this. He wasn't sure what kind of challenge was coming his way, but one thing was clear. It was coming. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, Tyler stood outside the barn, leaning against the weathered fence. He could feel the uncertainty gnawing at him, but at the same time, there was a sense of resolve. He had spent so much time with Blaze, hoping that someday they could do something together. And now that day was drawing near. Blaze stood in the stall, his head lowered, his eyes still a little wary, but calmer than they had ever been. Tyler took a deep breath and walked toward him. "You ready for this, boy?" Tyler murmured, his voice low and steady. Blaze didn't respond, but for the first time, Tyler wasn't expecting him to. He knew that Blaze wasn't the kind of horse who would leap into action without hesitation. But that was okay. They didn't need to be perfect, and they just needed to show up. The local boys' challenge had hit him harder than he wanted to admit. They had laughed at the idea of Blaze being anything more than a pitiful, trembling animal. But Tyler was determined to prove them wrong. He wasn't there to win. He wasn't even there to compete. He was there to show them something they'd never understand. That sometimes belief was stronger than any of the things they valued. Tyler's grandfather, Gus, hadn't been thrilled when Tyler told him about the rodeo. In fact, he had outright opposed it. "You're going to embarrass yourself, boy," Gus had warned, his voice gruff. "You can't ride that horse in the rodeo. You're just setting yourself up for a fall." But Tyler wasn't backing down. This was more than just about winning. It was about showing Blaze, showing himself, that they could do something that no one thought possible. The morning of the Spring Valley Rodeo arrived, and the small town was buzzing with excitement. The air was thick with the sounds of chatter and laughter, the pounding of hooves, and the occasional squeal of a nervous steer. Tyler felt a knot form in his stomach as he and Blaze entered the rodeo grounds. The stands were packed with spectators, their eyes all on the riders and the horses, the strong, the experienced, the ones who were built for this kind of thing. Blaze looked out across the arena, his body stiff, his eyes wide with nervous energy. Tyler placed a reassuring hand on his neck, feeling the warmth of the horse beneath his fingers. "We've got this," he whispered. The challenge had been set. Derek and the other boys had laughed when they'd heard that Tyler was entering Blaze in the rodeo, betting against him from the moment they heard the news. Tyler had heard the whispers as he walked past them earlier in the day. "This is going to be a disaster," Derek had snickered. "That horse won't even make it to the gate." But Tyler wasn't focused on Derek's words. He wasn't focused on the crowd's expectations. All he cared about was Blaze and the quiet bond they had built together. They weren't going to fall apart. They were going to do something that no one thought possible. And that was enough. Tyler mounted Blaze, the familiar weight of the saddle beneath him. The Mustang stood tall, his body trembling but determined. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed down, and all the noise and pressure from the crowd faded into the background. It was just him and Blaze. As they took their position at the starting gate, Tyler's heart pounded in his chest. The announcer's voice echoed through the arena. but all Tyler could hear was the rhythm of his own breath. The gate opened, and Blaze took his first step into the arena. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Tyler urged Blaze forward, the horse trotting slowly at first, hesitant. Tyler felt the muscles in his legs tighten as he urged Blaze into a canter, the horse's hooves pounding the dirt beneath him. Blaze's body was still weak, but there was a spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before. They approached the first obstacle, a low jump. Tyler braced himself as Blaze lifted his front legs, pushing himself over the barrier with a powerful leap. The crowd gasped, the sound of their surprise ringing through the arena. They didn't win. They didn't even come close. But as Tyler crossed the finish line, the crowd erupted into applause. Some were standing, some were clapping with genuine respect. They hadn't won the race, but they had finished. And that was something no one had expected. Tyler pulled Blaze to a stop, his heart still racing. He could feel the sweat on his brow, the exhaustion in his limbs. But in that moment, he knew they had achieved something far more important than a ribbon or a trophy. They had defied the odds, and for the first time in his life, Tyler didn't care what the world thought. And as he looked out at the crowd, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. It wasn't the victory he had imagined, but it was a victory all the same. And for the first time, Tyler felt like he belonged. Not because of what he had accomplished, but because of what he had shared with Blaze. The rodeo grounds were still alive with the energy of the competition. But for Tyler and Blaze, everything had slowed down. The dust that had clouded the air in the heat of the day and had settled, leaving a warm, golden hue over the arena. The stands, filled with the excited chatter of the crowd, seemed to fade away into the background as Tyler stood quietly in the stables, looking out at Blaze. Blaze was calmer now. His body had stopped trembling so violently. The Mustang stood with his head lowered, eyes half closed, his breathing steady. It was a stark contrast to the horse that had arrived at the ranch months ago, the fearful, trembling creature who flinched at every touch. Tyler couldn't help but smile as he reached out, gently running his fingers over the horse's neck. It had taken time, patience, and a quiet belief that they could get through it. But now, standing there with Blaze, Tyler finally understood something profound. Trust wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, time after time, even when it seemed impossible. "You did it, boy," Tyler whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Blaze turned his head slightly, his deep brown eyes meeting Tyler's, and for the first time, Tyler saw a flicker of something else, something that felt like mutual understanding. They had made it. Not just to the rodeo, but through all the challenges that had stood in their way. And as Tyler looked at Blaze, he felt a deep sense of connection, as though the horse wasn't just part of his story now, but part of him. Later that evening, as the sun dipped lower on the horizon and the crowd began to thin out, Tyler stood near the edge of the arena, his heart still racing from the ride. He had already seen the surprise on the faces of the other riders and spectators. No one expected Blaze to do anything other than fall or freeze in fear. But they had finished the course, something no one had thought possible. There was no trophy, no first-place ribbon, but there was something more valuable. There was respect. There was the quiet recognition that sometimes the greatest victories weren't the ones that came with accolades. They were the ones that came with overcoming doubt, defying expectations, and simply showing up. Hey, Tyler looked at Blaze, still standing quietly by his side. "You're something special, you know that?" he said, reaching up to pat the Mustang's neck. Blaze responded with a low nicker, nudging his shoulder against Tyler, as if in agreement. The event was winding down, but as Tyler prepared to leave the arena, a voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see a man approaching, a polished cowboy hat perched on his head and a confident stride that indicated experience. Tyler didn't recognize him at first, but the man's presence felt important. "You've got a real horse there, kid," the man said, his voice calm, but with an edge of authority. Tyler raised an eyebrow. "Thanks," he replied, unsure of what to make of the compliment. The man walked up to Tyler, extending his hand in. "Name's Caleb Whitmore. I'm a trainer. I've been watching you and that horse of yours." Tyler shook his hand, still unsure of where this was going. Caleb's gaze flicked over to Blaze, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I gotta say, I didn't expect to see a horse like that run today, especially not after all the rumors. But I've gotta admit, you proved me wrong. That horse has got heart." Tyler nodded, a quiet sense of pride swelling in his chest. "He's not perfect," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "But he's mine, and he's got more heart than anyone I know." Caleb smiled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "I can see that. Listen, kid, I've got an offer for you. We could do something with that horse. You ever thought about training him professionally? I've got connections, resources. We could get him to the next level." Tyler hesitated, a mix of emotions flooding through him. The idea of turning Blaze into a professional rodeo horse was tempting. It was the kind of thing most kids his age would dream of. But Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that Blaze wasn't just a tool to be sold or trained. He had spent too long bonding with this horse, too many quiet nights in the barn, too many hours spent patiently waiting for trust to blossom. He couldn't just let Blaze go like that. "I appreciate the offer," Tyler said finally, his voice steady but firm. "But I don't think I could ever sell him. Blaze isn't just some horse to me. He's my partner. We've been through too much together." Caleb studied Tyler for a moment, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. Finally, he nodded, as if making a decision. "Fair enough," he said. "But if you change your mind, the offer stands. A horse like that, well, there's a lot of money to be made if you know what you're doing." Tyler smiled softly, his decision already made. Thanks, but Blaze isn't for sale." As Caleb turned and walked away, Tyler's thoughts returned to the earlier moments in the arena. They hadn't won first place. They hadn't even been in the top 10. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the way the crowd had reacted. The shock, the awe, and the quiet respect that followed them as they made their way off the field. Tyler had done what they said was impossible. He had shown that belief in something or someone, even the most broken and forgotten, could lead to something bigger than anyone imagined. Tyler stood in the fading light, Blaze by his side. And for the first time, he realized that this was just the beginning. What they had done today wasn't the end of the story. It was a new chapter. One where the underdog could stand tall and proud, no longer the butt of jokes, no longer the forgotten one. Together, they had shown the world that sometimes the greatest victories came not from the loudest cheers or the fastest times, but from the quiet moments of belief that no one could see. And Tyler knew, as he looked at Blaze, that they had only just begun to show what they were capable of. The days after the rodeo had been a whirlwind. Tyler and Blaze had become local heroes in their small town. People stopped him on the street to congratulate him, to shake his hand, and some even offered kind words of encouragement. It felt surreal to Tyler. Just a week ago, he was an outcast, mocked for being too soft, too kind for a world that valued toughness over anything else. But now, it was different. People were starting to see Blaze not as the broken, weak animal he had once been, but as something more, something capable. Despite the newfound attention, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. He wasn't sure what, but there was a nagging sense that this story wasn't finished yet. Maybe it was the way people looked at him now, with a mixture of awe and surprise. Maybe it was the way things had changed with Blaze, the quiet bond they'd forged. Maybe it was the unexpected visit from Caleb Whitmore, the trainer who had approached him after the rodeo. Caleb had been adamant about his offer. A professional trainer, national recognition. Tyler's heart had raced when Caleb had first made the suggestion. It was everything Tyler had dreamed of. But there was something about it that didn't sit right. Selling Blaze would mean separating them. It would mean losing what they had, the trust, the companionship, the promise they had made to each other, that they would stick together no matter what. It wasn't an easy decision, but Tyler knew what had to be done. That afternoon, after school, Tyler found himself standing outside the barn, watching Blaze graze lazily on the patch of grass just outside the stable. The horse's coat was shining in the afternoon sun, the soft wind ruffling his mane. For a moment, Tyler forgot about everything else. The people who had laughed at him, the expectations of the world around him, the pressure of the offer. It was just him and Blaze, the way it had always been. Tyler leaned against the barn door, his arms crossed, and watched the Mustang for a while. He didn't want to make the decision to let Blaze go, to separate the two of them. He had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to sell him, no matter how much money was on the table. The bond they shared was worth far more than any prize money or recognition. "Hey, Tyler." It was his grandpa's voice, the gruff tone cutting through the quiet of the barn. Gus appeared in the doorway, his face half hidden by the wide-brimmed hat he always wore. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms folded in front of him. He didn't have to say anything. Tyler could tell he'd been watching him. Tyler turned slowly, meeting his grandfather's gaze. "What's up, Grandpa?" "You've been quiet today," Gus said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he observed Tyler's face. "Something on your mind?" Tyler nodded slowly. He had been keeping a lot to himself lately, unsure of how to handle the attention they were getting or how to deal with the conflicting emotions inside him. He thought about Caleb's offer again, how tempting it had been. He thought about all the things Blaze could do, the kind of life he could have if he went to a trainer who knew how to bring out the best in him. But Tyler also thought about what he was giving up, the companionship, the quiet moments they shared, and the trust that had taken so long to build. "It's about Blaze," Tyler said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Caleb made me an offer. He wants to buy Blaze. He thinks he can make him into a top rodeo horse, put him on the national stage." Gus raised an eyebrow, his face unreadable. "That's so?" "Yeah," Tyler continued, his voice tight. "And I don't know what to do. It's a good offer, a lot of money, and I know Blaze could do amazing things with the right training, but I don't want to let him go, Grandpa. I've spent so much time with him. He's not just a horse to me." Gus was quiet for a moment, the air around them thick with the weight of unspoken thoughts. He stood there, looking at the Mustang, then back at Tyler. "You know," Gus said slowly, "when I first saw that horse, I thought you were out of your mind. I thought you were just wasting your time. But I've seen how hard you've worked with him. I've seen how you've changed, Tyler. You're not the same boy who came to us all those years ago, trying to prove you could do everything your way." Tyler looked down, not sure where his grandfather was going with this. "Blaze isn't just a horse to you," Gus went on, his voice softening. "He's something you've put your heart into, something you've built. And if you ask me, that's worth more than any offer Caleb could make. I don't know if you'll ever get another chance like this, but what I do know is that it's your decision. And whatever you choose, I'll be behind you." Tyler was silent for a long moment. His grandfather's words hit him hard. He had always felt like he didn't quite measure up, that his way of doing things was never enough. But here, with Blaze, he had found something that worked. He had found a partner, not just in the rodeo, but in life. Tyler took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm not selling him, Grandpa. I can't. I've spent too long working to build something with Blaze, and I'm not going to throw that away." Gus smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened his weathered face. "Good choice there with Tyler. You've got heart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." And just like that, Tyler knew that the right decision had been made. It wasn't about the money or the fame. It was about Blaze. And the quiet moments they shared together. The bond between them was unbreakable, and Tyler would protect it, no matter what. The next day, Tyler sent a message to Caleb, politely turning down the offer. He didn't need the money. He didn't need the fame. What he needed was Blaze. And that was more than enough. Tyler knew that the journey was far from over, but as he stood in the barn, watching Blaze munch on the hay, he realized something. Sometimes, the best offers aren't the ones that come with a price tag. Sometimes, they're the ones that come with a bond. The kind that can't be bought, only earned. And that was worth more than anything else. The morning after he turned down Caleb's offer, Tyler awoke to the same golden sunlight streaming through the cracks in the barn doors. It was the kind of light that made everything look a little more alive, a little more real. But there was something different in the air that day. Something he couldn't quite shake off. It had started small. At first, it was just a few whispers here and there. The local newspaper had caught wind of Tyler and Blaze's performance at the rodeo, the unexpected finish that had stunned everyone in the crowd. It wasn't a headline-making victory, but the story was one that resonated with people. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about defying expectations, about believing in something when no one else did. Soon, the whispers turned into messages, into emails, texts, even social media posts. The local news station had picked up the story, then a regional outlet had followed suit. Tyler had never thought of himself as a story worth telling, but now, his and Blaze's quiet bond had become something more. People were reaching out from all over the country, thanking him for showing them that anything was possible. It was a humbling feeling, though it made Tyler uneasy. He wasn't doing it for recognition. He was doing it because of Blaze, and because of the one thing he had always known deep down. When you believe in something, you should give it everything you've got. One morning, Tyler walked into the kitchen to find his grandpa sitting at the table, a coffee cup in hand. Gus was staring at the screen of the old TV, his face hard to read. "What's up, Grandpa?" Tyler asked, his voice still thick with sleep. Gus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for Tyler to sit. "You better look at this," Gus said, his voice gruff, but there was something in his tone that made Tyler pause. Tyler walked over to the TV, squinting at the screen. The anchor on the local news was talking about the boy and his horse. Tyler and Blaze. There were images of the rodeo, the horse clearing jumps, and people in the stands clapping. The headline read, "Boy and horse defy the odds at Spring Valley Rodeo." Tyler's stomach flipped. He hadn't expected this. Not in a million years. "Looks like you're famous now," Gus said, his voice tinged with something close to pride. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the sudden attention. It wasn't just the local news anymore. Tyler's story had gone viral. A video of their ride had been posted online, and now it was everywhere. His inbox was flooded with messages from people across the country. Some were simple messages of encouragement. Others were more intense. People sharing their own stories of struggle and how Tyler's and Blaze's story had given them hope. Tyler felt overwhelmed. He didn't want fame or attention. He just wanted to keep working with Blaze, to keep doing what they had been doing. But the world had a different idea. Days later, Tyler found himself sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. A message caught his eye. It was from a man named Mark Hendricks, a former rodeo champion turned coach. Mark had seen the viral video and wanted to meet. Tyler's heart raced. This was the kind of thing he had always dreamed of, a chance to work with someone who knew the ropes, someone who could help them take Blaze to the next level. But something in Tyler's gut told him that this wasn't just about Blaze's potential. It was about the pressure to turn Blaze into something he wasn't, something he didn't need to be. That afternoon, Mark Hendricks showed up at the ranch. He was older, with a weathered face, and the kind of easy confidence that came from years of experience. He was tall, dressed in cowboy boots and a crisp shirt, his hat perched just right on his head. Tyler felt a mix of awe and hesitation. He had always admired people like Mark, the ones who had made it big, the ones who seemed to know everything. But now that he was face to face with him, Tyler wasn't sure what to think. Mark wasted no time getting to the point. "You've got something special there, Tyler. I can see it. I've been watching that video over and over, and it's clear. Blaze has the heart, but he needs more. With the right training, he could be a champion." Tyler shifted uncomfortably, looking over at Blaze, who was standing in the field grazing peacefully. He wasn't sure how he felt about it all. The idea of training Blaze for something bigger was tempting, but Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that Blaze was more than just a tool for success. Blaze had become his partner, his equal, not a project to be molded into someone else's idea of a winner. Mark leaned in, his voice low and persuasive. "Listen, Tyler, you've got something here that could take you places. People will pay top dollar for a horse like Blaze, national recognition, a spot in the rodeo circuit. You can make a name for yourself, not just with Blaze, but for yourself." Tyler's heart pounded in his chest. This was what everyone had wanted him to do, wasn't it? Take the offer, get the fame, get the money. This was what people expected of him, the kind of story they loved to see. But Tyler wasn't sure that was the kind of story he wanted to tell. "Not anymore." "I appreciate the offer, Mark," Tyler said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "But I'm not sure Blaze is just some horse for sale. He's more than that. He's a partner, he's part of this family, and I'm not going to turn him into a commodity." Mark seemed taken aback, his eyebrows raised in surprise. But Tyler stood firm, meeting his gaze. This wasn't about winning championships or making money. It was about doing the right thing. For Blaze, for himself, for the journey they had taken together. As Mark left the ranch that day, Tyler felt a sense of relief wash over him. He wasn't sure where their journey would lead, but he knew one thing for certain: it wasn't going to be dictated by anyone else's expectations. Later that evening, Tyler sat in the barn with Blaze, the Mustang standing quietly beside him. The steady rhythm of Blaze's breathing was the only sound, and Tyler realized that, for the first time in his life, he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The world could keep watching, but it didn't matter. Blaze nudged Tyler's shoulder gently, and Tyler smiled, his heart swelling with pride. They had come this far together, and they were just getting started. Whatever the future held, they would face it, side by side. The weeks following the rodeo were a whirlwind of attention and unexpected changes. Tyler and Blaze had become symbols of resilience, and while Tyler had initially resisted the idea of turning their story into something more, he couldn't ignore the ripple effect their success had created. People from all over had reached out, expressing their admiration and gratitude for the message they had sent, that even the most broken things could find a way to thrive with belief and patience. It wasn't just the media. Tyler had received messages from people who had gone through hardships of their own, people who had felt invisible, or broken, or lost. They shared their stories with him, telling him how Blaze's story had inspired them to keep going. Tyler hadn't realized it before, but his journey with Blaze had transcended the boundaries of the rodeo. It had become something bigger. It had become a reminder that strength wasn't about being the biggest or the fastest. It was about showing up, even when it seemed impossible. One afternoon, as Tyler sat in the barn with Blaze, brushing the Mustang's coat, he felt a sense of deep contentment. It wasn't the fame that mattered. It wasn't the messages or the offers. It was the quiet moments with Blaze. The way the horse had become a part of him, a symbol of everything he had fought for. He had come so far, not just with Blaze, but within himself. He was no longer the boy who had been laughed at. He was a young man who had built something real, something lasting, from the ground up. But Tyler knew there was more to be done. He couldn't just stop here, not when he had seen the power of what he and Blaze had achieved together. They had defied the odds, yes, but there were other kids out there. Kids who had been forgotten. Kids who needed the kind of chance Tyler had been given, and he knew he could give that to them. Tyler's grandpa, Gus, had been the one to suggest the idea first. He had watched Tyler grow, watched the quiet shift in his demeanors as the bond with Blaze had deepened. "You've got something here, son," Gus had said, leaning against the porch railing one evening as the sun set. "You've built something with Blaze that's bigger than a rodeo. You've shown what belief can do. Maybe it's time to share that. Pay it forward, like they say." At first, Tyler hadn't known what that meant. He had never considered himself a teacher or someone with wisdom to share. But as he thought about it more, the idea began to take root. He'd always wanted to make a difference. And now, with Blaze by his side, he had the platform to do that. It didn't take long before Tyler and Gus started the Rescue to Ride program. They wanted to give kids who had been through tough times the same opportunity he had, the opportunity to believe in themselves, to have a partner like Blaze, to experience the healing power of working with an animal that had been broken, just like they were. Tyler wasn't sure how it would go at first. He wasn't sure if the kids would even care. But he had to try. He had to give it a shot. The first few kids to come to the program were skeptical. They were kids from tough backgrounds, from families that had been torn apart by poverty or addiction, kids who had never been shown kindness or patience. They had been let down so many times before that they didn't trust easily. But Tyler had learned something in his time with Blaze. He had learned that trust couldn't be forced. It had to be earned slowly through quiet actions, through consistency. And so that's what Tyler did. He showed up every day, just like he had with Blaze. He listened to the kids, helped them work with the horses, and most importantly, he let them see what was possible when you didn't give up. It wasn't easy. Some of the kids were angry, unwilling to open up, unwilling to try. But over time, Tyler began to see the same changes in them that he had seen in Blaze. The small steps towards trust, the quiet moments of progress. One girl, Lila, had come to the program with a chip on her shoulder, convinced that nothing was worth her time. But after weeks of working with a stubborn gelding named King, Lila began to soften. One day, after hours of working together, King finally allowed Lila to mount him without hesitation. The smile that broke across her face was one of the most rewarding moments Tyler had ever experienced. "It's like he trusts me," Lila had said, her voice filled with awe. "He really trusts me." Tyler nodded, feeling a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "You earned it," he said quietly. It was moments like that, small victories that no one else would ever see, that made all the difference. It wasn't about the big wins or the recognition. It was about showing up every day for the kids and for the horses and letting them know that they were worth the effort. As the program grew, so did its impact. More and more kids came, each with their own story, each with their own struggles. Some came from broken homes, some from the foster system, and some from the streets. But every one of them had one thing in common. They had been overlooked. They had been told that they didn't matter, that they couldn't succeed. Tyler and Blaze were there to show them that it wasn't true. They had been the ones no one believed in. But now, they were the ones doing the believing. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of training, Tyler stood in the barn with Blaze. The horses were quiet, content, and the air was thick with the satisfaction of a job well done. Tyler stroked Blaze's neck gently, feeling the warmth of the horse beneath his fingers. "You did good today, boy," Tyler whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. Blaze nickered softly in response, as though acknowledging the bond between them. Tyler's heart swelled with pride. This wasn't just about him or Blaze anymore. It was about something bigger. something that could change lives. And in that moment, Tyler realized that he had done more than just rescue a horse. He had rescued himself, and now he was helping others do the same. Blaze had carried him through his darkest moments. Now, together, they were helping others find their way. It had been over a year since Tyler and Blaze had first crossed paths at the auction, and so much had changed in that time. The small, quiet life that Tyler had lived with his grandfather on the ranch had transformed into something bigger, something more meaningful. Their story, once a forgotten tale of a boy and a broken horse, had become a symbol of belief, resilience, and the power of second chances. What had started as a mission to prove everyone wrong had blossomed into something more profound, a mission to inspire others, to show them that their worth wasn't determined by their past or by others' opinions. Tyler had grown too. The boy who had once been unsure of his place in the world was now a young man who had found his voice. And as he stood in the barn, looking out at the fields beyond, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had brought him here. For Blaze, for the struggle, for the quiet moments of progress, and for the people who had come into his life along the way. This particular evening, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Tyler found himself standing beside Blaze, both of them soaking in the beauty of the moment. It was the kind of evening that made the world feel still, almost sacred. The golden light stretched across the field, painting everything in soft hues of orange and pink. The air was warm and filled with the earthy scent of hay and grass. "You ready for this, boy?" Tyler whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. Blaze stood beside him, his body calm but alert, his mane flowing gently in the wind. It wasn't just a random day. This was a day that had been a long time coming. After everything they had been through, after all the challenges, the setbacks, and the triumphs, it was time to bring their journey full circle. Tyler gently led Blaze out of the barn, toward the fields that stretched before them. His heart beat a little faster as they moved into the open space. He could feel the weight of the moment, not just for him, but for everything they had accomplished together. This wasn't just about one last ride. It was about everything they had built, everything they had become. The program, the kids they had helped, the lives they had touched. It had all led them to this point. But there was something else too. The quiet understanding that, in the end, it wasn't about the rodeos or the viral videos or even the offers of money or fame. It was about the connection they had formed. The bond between a boy and a horse, forged in patience, trust, and belief. As Tyler swung himself into the saddle, he felt a deep sense of peace. The world, for once, seemed to slow down, as though acknowledging the significance of this moment. Blaze shifted beneath him, a slight ripple of energy moving through the horse's body. For a second, Tyler was transported back to the beginning, to that first ride on Blaze, when everything had been uncertain. They had been two broken things coming together to build something. And now they had become a team, a partnership built on understanding, not perfection. With a gentle nudge of his heels, Tyler urged Blaze forward. The Mustang moved at a steady trot, his hooves rhythmically hitting the earth as they traveled across the familiar fields of the ranch. It was like the world had opened up for them, as though they were finally in the place they were always meant to be. As they moved together, side by side, Tyler realized something that had been clear all along. This was their moment. Their journey wasn't defined by others, by the doubts and mockery they had faced. It was theirs, and it had always been theirs. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the open fields with it. Tyler felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. There was no rush, no pressure to be anything other than what they were. It wasn't a race. It wasn't a competition. It was just the two of them, in perfect harmony, with the world around them. As they reached the far edge of the property, Tyler slowed Blaze to a stop. They stood there for a moment, overlooking the valley, the golden fields stretching out before them. Tyler took a deep breath, savoring the quiet beauty of the scene. It was hard to believe how far they had come, from the skeptical looks at the auction to this moment, where they had proved, not just to the world, but to themselves, that they were enough. Tyler's mind wandered back to the first time he had stood in this field with Blaze, unsure of what the future held, unsure of whether or not they would ever get this far. But now, it felt different. This wasn't the end. It was just another chapter, one of many in a story that had only just begun. He turned Blaze around and started back toward the barn. As they trotted home, Tyler felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything. The horses, the people who had supported them, and most of all, for Blaze, his partner, his friend, the horse who had taught him more than any human could. When they reached the barn, Tyler dismounted and led Blaze inside, the cool air of the stable greeting them. He removed the saddle and took a moment to just stand with the Mustang, his hand resting on Blaze's back, feeling the steady rhythm of the horse's breath. "You carried me when I didn't think I could go on," Tyler whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And you've carried a message farther than anyone expected." He paused for a moment, looking out at the barn doors, the wide fields stretching beyond. There was a sense of completion in the air, but not in the way most people would think. It wasn't the end of their journey. It was the beginning of something more. Tyler didn't need fame or money or trophies. He had Blaze, and together they had proven that sometimes the one no one believes in can go farther than anyone ever imagined. And as Tyler stood there in the barn with Blaze, he realized that the ride had changed everything. Not just for him, but for anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. The lesson was simple. Sometimes, the one nobody wants just needs one person to believe.